It was a warm August evening, and Megan was on a solo road trip from Chicago to Denver. She had been planning this trip for months, eager for some time alone to clear her head and escape the hustle of city life. With her car loaded with snacks, music, and a map highlighting scenic routes, she felt ready for adventure. Little did she know, this journey would soon become a nightmare. By the time Megan reached Nebraska, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the open fields. She decided to push on for another couple of hours before finding a motel for the night. The road was nearly empty, a ribbon of asphalt stretching into the horizon. As the night grew darker, Megan's sense of solitude intensified. The only light came from her headlights slicing through the darkness and the occasional streetlight. About an hour later, as Megan drove through a particularly desolate stretch, she saw a figure by the side of the road, a hitchhiker. He was tall and thin, with a backpack slung over one shoulder and his thumb out. Normally, Megan wouldn't consider picking up a hitchhiker, especially not at night. But something about this man seemed different. He looked desperate, almost frantic. Against her better judgment, she slowed down and pulled over. The man jogged up to her car, relief washing over his face. "Thank you so much," he said, breathless. "My car broke down a few miles back, and I haven't seen anyone for hours." "Where are you headed?" Megan asked. "Just to the next town," he replied. "If you could drop me off there, I'd be really grateful." Megan hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Hop in." As they drove, the man introduced himself as Dave. He seemed friendly enough, chatting about his road trip and how his car had suddenly died on him. Megan found herself relaxing a bit, glad for the company. However, as the miles rolled by, she noticed something odd. Dave kept glancing nervously at the rear-view mirror, as if expecting someone to appear behind them. "Are you okay?" Megan finally asked. Dave looked at her, his expression tense. "There's something you need to know," he said. "When my car broke down, it wasn't an accident. Someone did it." Megan's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "Someone's been following me," he explained. "A black SUV. I noticed it tailing me for miles, keeping its distance but never losing sight of me. When I pulled over to check my engine, the SUV stopped too. That's when I knew something was wrong. I didn't want to stay and find out what they wanted, so I started walking." Megan's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Are you saying they're after you?" Dave nodded. "I'm afraid so. And now you might be in danger too." As if on cue, Megan saw headlights in the rearview mirror, a black SUV, far enough back to be inconspicuous, but close enough to be unnerving. Her stomach twisted with fear. "What do we do?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Keep driving," Dave said. "We need to get to a populated area. They won't try anything with witnesses around." Megan pressed her foot down on the gas, her mind racing. The empty road stretched out endlessly before them, and the SUV remained a constant presence behind them. Minutes felt like hours as they sped towards the distant glow of the next town. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they reached the outskirts of a small town. Megan pulled into a well-lit gas station, her hands shaking. Dave quickly got out of the car, thanking her profusely. "You should get inside," he advised. "Call the police and tell them what happened." Megan nodded, her heart still pounding. She watched as Dave disappeared into the night, then hurried inside the gas station. The clerk gave her a concerned look as she explained the situation and dialed 911. The police arrived shortly after, taking her statement and reassuring her that they would search for the black SUV. As Megan sat in the safety of the gas station, she couldn't help but feel a lingering sense of dread. She had escaped unharmed, but the memory of that night would haunt her for a long time. When the police finally escorted her to a nearby motel, Megan lay awake, listening to every creak and groan of the building. She knew she'd never forget the hitchhiker's warning and the terror of being pursued on a dark, lonely road. Mark and Lisa had been planning their cross-country road trip for years. After finally saving enough vacation days and cash, they set off from their home in Atlanta, aiming for the West Coast. Their route took them through the heart of Texas, where endless stretches of highway were flanked by barren landscapes and scorching sun. On the third day of their journey, they found themselves driving through a particularly remote part of Texas. The GPS indicated they should reach the next town within a couple of hours, but as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Mark noticed the fuel gauge was dangerously low. He cursed himself for not filling up at the last gas station they passed. Just as anxiety started to creep in, they spotted a sign for a gas station 5 miles ahead. Relieved, Mark accelerated, hoping they would make it before running out of gas. The sky turned dark and the road seemed to stretch endlessly into the night. When they finally saw the flickering neon lights of the gas station, it was like a beacon of hope. The station appeared old and run down, with a single pump and a small, dimly lit building. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than being stranded. Mark pulled up to the pump and turned off the engine. "I'll fill up the tank. You can grab some snacks or something," he told Lisa, trying to keep the mood light. Lisa nodded and got out, making her way to the building. As she approached, she noticed the place looked even more decrepit up close. The windows were covered in grime, and the door creaked loudly as she pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of dust and old oil. Shelves were sparsely stocked with outdated snacks and drinks. Behind the counter sat an old man with a weathered face and piercing blue eyes. He looked up slowly as Lisa entered, a creepy smile spreading across his face. "Evening, miss," he greeted, his voice raspy. "Need something?" Lisa forced a smile and grabbed a couple of bags of chips and some water. "Just these," she said, placing the items on the counter. The old man rang her up slowly, his eyes never leaving her. "You folks traveling far?" he asked, his tone unsettling. "Just passing through," Lisa replied, eager to get back to the car. She handed over some cash and took the change with a quick thanks before hurrying out. As she stepped back outside, she saw Mark struggling with the pump. "What's wrong?" she called out. "It's not working," Mark replied, frustration evident in his voice. "I think the pump's broken." Lisa's unease grew. "Let's just get out of here," she suggested. "We'll find another station." Mark agreed and they got back into the car. But when Mark turned the key, the engine sputtered and died. He tried again, but the car refused to start. "Great," he muttered. "Now what?" Before Lisa could respond, the old man appeared outside their window, tapping on the glass. "Having some trouble?" he asked, his smile never fading. "Yeah, the car won't start," Mark said, rolling down the window slightly. The old man's smile widened. "Why don't you come inside? I've got a phone you can use to call for help." Lisa's instincts screamed at her to refuse, but Mark seemed to think it was their only option. "All right, thanks," he said, opening the door. They followed the old man back into the building, where he pointed to an old rotary phone on the counter. "There you go," he said. "Feel free to use it." Mark picked up the receiver and started dialing. As he waited for someone to pick up, Lisa wandered around the small store, trying to ignore the creepy feeling that settled over her. She noticed a door behind the counter, slightly ajar, leading to a dark hallway. Curiosity got the better of her, and she took a few steps closer, peeking inside. The hallway was lined with old photographs and newspaper clippings, all yellowed with age. One clipping caught her eye, a headline that read, Local gas station owner disappears. Foul play suspected. Lisa's blood ran cold. She turned to call for Mark, but the old man was suddenly behind her, blocking her path. His smile had turned sinister. "Looking for something?" he asked, his voice now a menacing growl. Lisa backed away, her heart pounding. "Mark, let's go," she shouted. Mark turned just as the phone line went dead. He saw the fear in Lisa's eyes and bolted towards her. The old man lunged at them, but they managed to dodge him and sprint out the door. They ran to the car, Mark desperately trying the ignition again. Miraculously, the engine roared to life. They sped out of the gas station, not daring to look back until they were miles down the road. Breathless and shaken, Lisa finally spoke. "We need to call the police." Mark nodded, glancing in the rearview mirror to make sure they weren't being followed. "We will, as soon as we get to the next town." They drove in tense silence, the eerie encounter replaying in their minds. They knew they had narrowly escaped something terrible, and it would be a long time before they felt safe again on the open road. Eric and his friends, Jake and Sarah, were on their annual road trip. This year, they decided to explore the rugged beauty of the Pacific Northwest. The plan was to camp in various spots, enjoying the serene forests and majestic mountains. Their route took them through winding roads and dense forests, far from the hustle and bustle of city life. On the fourth day of their trip, they found themselves driving along a particularly isolated road deep in the heart of the forest. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the treetops. They had planned to reach a campsite by dusk, but as darkness fell, they realized they had taken a wrong turn. "We should have been there by now," Eric muttered, checking the map under the dim car light. "Are you sure we're on the right road?" Jake, who was driving, shrugged. "This is what the GPS is saying. Maybe it's just a bit further." Sarah, sitting in the back, glanced out the window, her eyes scanning the encroaching darkness. "It feels like we're in the middle of nowhere." The road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, flanked by towering trees that seemed to close in on them. After another half hour of driving, they finally saw a sign: Blackwood Forest Campground, 5 miles. Relieved, they continued, but a sense of unease lingered in the car. As they approached the campground, the road became narrower and more treacherous. The headlights barely cut through the thick fog that had settled in. Finally, they reached the entrance to the campground. The place looked deserted, with only a few dilapidated cabins and a sign that looked like it hadn't been maintained in years. "Are you sure this is the right place?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. "It's what the map says," Eric replied, though he didn't sound convinced. They parked the car and got out, the cool night air sending shivers down their spines. The forest was eerily silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves. They set up their tent quickly, eager to get some rest and hoping the morning light would make everything seem less creepy. As they settled in for the night, they heard a faint sound in the distance. It was hard to make out, but it sounded like singing, a soft, haunting melody that seemed to drift through the trees. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Jake nodded, straining to listen. "It's probably just the wind," he said, though he didn't sound convinced. The singing grew louder, more distinct. It was definitely a woman's voice, ethereal and chilling. Eric unzipped the tent and peeked outside, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The beam caught a figure in the distance, moving slowly among the trees. "Someone's out there," Eric whispered, his heart pounding. "Who would be out here at this hour?" Jake asked, joining Eric at the tent's entrance. The figure moved closer, the singing now clear and haunting. The woman appeared to be dressed in old-fashioned clothes, her face pale and eyes dark. She stopped just outside the reach of the flashlight's beam, staring at them with an unsettling intensity. "Hello," Eric called out, his voice shaky. "Do you need help?" The woman didn't respond. Instead, she tilted her head and continued to sing, the melody now filled with a strange, hypnotic quality. Eric felt an inexplicable urge to walk towards her, but Jake grabbed his arm. "Don't," Jake said firmly. "Something's not right." Suddenly, the woman stopped singing. The silence was deafening. She pointed behind them, her eyes wide with terror. Eric turned slowly, his flashlight revealing a group of shadowy figures emerging from the trees, their eyes glowing eerily in the dark. "Run!" Sarah screamed, grabbing her backpack. They bolted towards the car, the figures closing in behind them. Eric fumbled with the keys, finally unlocking the doors. They piled in and Jake floored the gas pedal, the car skidding on the gravel as they sped away. As they drove, Eric glanced in the rearview mirror. The figures were standing at the edge of the forest, watching them with those unnerving, glowing eyes. The woman was gone, her haunting melody still echoing in Eric's mind. They didn't stop until they reached a small town miles away. Breathless and shaken, they found a motel and checked in, not daring to talk about what had just happened. Lying in bed, Eric couldn't shake the image of the woman and those glowing eyes. He knew they had encountered something beyond explanation, something that would haunt their memories forever. The forest had secrets, dark and terrifying, and they had narrowly escaped its grasp. The next morning, they decided to cut their trip short and head back home. The beauty of the Pacific Northwest had been tainted by the nightmarish encounter, leaving them with a story they would never forget and a place they would never return to. If you want to see more horror stories, check out my next video.